Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. This week's episode is brought to you by Streaks Workout. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, as always, is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Good, good. You know, we've had kind of a busy week of news this week following up from WWDC. More details have come out about various things. There's been some other news items that have kind of come across our view this week, and I thought we would dive right in and talk a little bit about the Apple Design Awards because those were announced on Monday, which is unusual. Usually in past years when WWDC was in person, they were usually Monday evening, the first day of the conference. But this year, Apple held them off until the Monday after the conference had concluded, and there were 8 winners. There were 4 productivity apps and 4 games. There were primarily iPad-driven, I'd say, this year. I mean, there was Darkroom. They included a screenshot of the iPhone version of Darkroom in the announcement, although, of course, Darkroom added with version 4.0 an iPad version, which is very good. And so there's that. There's Loom. There was Shaper 3D. There's StaffPad, all of which are iPad apps. And then for games, there's Sayonara Wild Hearts, which is on arcade, Sky, Children of the Light, Song of Bloom, which is a game that I wasn't familiar with going into this.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, and Where Cards Fall, which is another arcade title by the Game Band, which is Sam Rosenthal's studio and published by Snowman, who you will remember from Alto's Adventure, perhaps. So is a really good crop of both games and productivity apps. I mean, I have covered both Darkroom and Sky in the club newsletter, and I know Ryan did a review of Sayonara Wild Hearts in the past. There's a lot of great apps here.
Yeah, and I especially like the focus on iPad apps this year. It's really nice to see something like StaffPad and Darkroom being specifically called out for their iPad experiences. I think it's really nice. And It fits with this theme of continuing the evolution of iPadOS, which we've also seen at WWDC. You remember last year, a lot of folks said, well, now Apple has split iOS into this separate fork for iPad called iPadOS, but will they continue to actually evolve iPadOS, or will we see meaningful changes only in a couple of years again? And no, we've seen some other big changes in iPadOS this year, and the Apple Design Awards are also showing a bunch of iPad-related winners. So I think that's really nice to see. And some people have complained about the lack of Mac apps on this year's awards, but that does not necessarily surprise me because, I mean, let's just face it, the market, there's just so much more variety on the iOS and on the iPhone and iPad App Store these days.
Right, especially when it comes to new things that have come out over the past year or so. Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit, Federico, and talk about the Apple Watch.
Wait, don't you want to tease something a bit special that we have coming on Monday? Come on. You know, we can reveal.
All right. We've got a little something coming next week.
We got a little something coming. Let's just say that if the topic of Apple Design Awards is of interest for you, you don't want to miss the next episode of AppStories out on Monday, this coming Monday. I don't want to spoil anything else because you know that I like my surprises, obviously. But you want to stay tuned for the next episode of AppStories, which is going to be a bit longer than usual for a reason, because it's a special one. It's special. So because it's special, there's a lot more content. So stay tuned. It's coming out on Monday. And I think if you like AppStories, you will like what we prepared for this one.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share that with everybody. And how quickly I forget about the special things we have planned, Federico. We've got so many different things going on that one just slipped my mind. But it is coming next Monday. Mm-hmm. All right, let's switch gears to the Apple Watch because Kevin Lynch spoke to CNET all about sleep tracking. And then there was also a story this week on TechCrunch about the hand washing feature. And Kevin Lynch's interview with CNET was really interesting to me because he talked all about how the sleep tracking feature works and how it's really fundamentally different than a lot of the third-party apps out there. It's not focused as precisely on the different periods of your sleep, REM sleep and all that sort of thing, and how long you were in each stage. Instead, it's focused on things like the wind down before you go to bed and the total amount of time you're in bed. Because as he explained, the idea was you can control how long you're in bed and you can control the process before you go to bed. And that kind of thing can be positively reinforced by the feature on the watch. What you can't do is really say, okay, I'm going to bed tonight and I'm going to get a whole bunch of REM cycles sleep, which I think is a really nice approach, because I have used third-party sleep tracking apps in the past where there was a little anxiety caused by the fact that, well, I would wake up in the morning and I'd have all this data about how I didn't sleep super well. I didn't have a lot of deep sleep. And what am I going to do about that? Because there's not really much you can do. But what you can control are things like when you go to bed, what you do before you go to bed, how long you're in bed, those sort of things. So I thought it was a really fascinating approach to it. Apple's been studying this, as you would probably be unsurprised to learn, for years, doing a lot of internal sleep studies. And it'll be interesting to see how this works. Have you tried it yet, Federico? Because I have not.
Not yet, because I haven't enabled any of the sleep functionalities on iOS 14 and watchOS 7. I do have the betas on my iPhone and watch, but I haven't actually enabled them yet. What I'm not surprised to hear that, like I've seen a few folks say that the sleep tracking feature for watchOS 7 does not report the same accurate data as, say, a Fitbit or some of the other sleep tracking apps that we've seen on the watch, on the iPhone and the watch, like AutoSleep. That does not surprise me, because I do have this theory that what we've seen with sleep at WWDC is only the first half of the story. I have a feeling that Apple has much more coming with future Apple Watch hardware in terms of sensors and in terms of really tracking your sleep and the quality of your sleep. So it does feel like I've seen some screenshots of people comparing the numbers, and like the Apple Watch reporting wildly different numbers from AutoSleep or a Fitbit. So I'm going to have to check it out. I'm going to have to take it for a spin. But I wouldn't be surprised if all this sleep tracking stuff will be much more accurate with the next watch.
Well, let me ask you then about something I know you have tried, which is the hand washing feature of watchOS 7.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So once you enable that, and I've seen a lot of people say, how do you actually enable it? I have no idea. You got to go in watchOS 7. You need to open settings on the watch. So the settings app for the watch. And then you will see hand washing as a new option. And in there, you can enable the hand washing timer as well as the haptic setting for it. And the way that it works is that when you wash your hands, it's not like you need to say something specific to Siri or you need to tap on like a complication or anything. As soon as the watch detects that you're washing your hands, by using a combination of signals here, like the noise of running water, as well as the noise of soap, which has a very specific sound signature according to Apple, as well as the accelerometer, so the motion of your hands, the watch can detect when you're washing your hands. And if it does, it'll display this sort of soap bubble themed timer on the locks on the watch face that encourages you to wash your hands. And if you stop, it tells you, well, no, actually go on a bit more because you're not done. So it encourages you to wash your hands for those 15, 20 seconds as is recommended by the World Health Organization. The problem, however, is that while it is impressive in that it does pick up when you're washing your hands, in this first beta of watchOS 7, it also assumes that you're washing your hands when you're doing something completely unrelated to washing your hands. So I've heard from people say things like, I was gardening and the watch started telling me to wash my hands because a particular motion that I was doing with my hands, the watch was confused and thought that I was actually washing them. Or for me, like, it picks up every single time when you're washing the dishes.
Oh, right.
That it assumes that you're washing your hands. It also picked it up for me when I was doing something completely random, like cooking, or I was playing with my dogs, like throwing like a tennis ball. And at some point the watch said, "Oh, keep going." I was like, "Keep going what?" And it thought that I was washing my hands. So it needs to be, I mean, it's a first beta. It needs to be a bit more accurate. And once again, I do wonder, all of these features, just how much better they could go with future, a better microphone or new sensors and, future improvements in the watch hardware.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that this is not necessarily a direct response to the pandemic, because Apple told TechCrunch that this has been in development for years. So they've been working on this for a while.
Yeah, that it's nice to hear that this is not just, I mean, even if it was a pandemic-related feature, I think it would be okay. But Apple said that they were working on this before. I don't really understand what there needs to be a justification. We live in strange and difficult times. And so, it would be perfectly reasonable to have it be a pandemic, a feature that came about as a consequence of the pandemic. That would be totally fine.
Right.
I'm all for these companies reassessing and saying, well, these features that we had planned, let's put them on the back burner and let's focus on these pandemic-related features like the exposure tracking notifications, for example. So
right.
I'm totally okay with it, honestly. But Apple is saying, no, we started working on this years ago. And I mean, fine, okay, but really, it's not a problem.
Yeah, no, the timing was good, whether they started working on it years ago or last week, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Right. All right. We also linked this week to a story from Michael Flarerup, who had an article all about Big Sur's new design, and really specifically the iconography, which is changing quite a bit. And I've seen it's kind of a polarizing thing. I mean, I think design tends to be that. I mean, especially when you're used to a particular design and it changes rather abruptly, it can, some people will love it, other people will kind of hate it. And what I think was interesting about Michael's story is, he has been an advocate for a long time of pushing back a little bit on the flat design that was introduced with iOS 7 and allowing back in fun and expression into design, especially in iconography. And his view in this article, which I highly recommend to anybody, is that this is Apple doing that we're seeing for the first time in a long time more fun and expression coming into the iconography on the Mac, when you might have expected that if the Mac and iPad were starting to come closer to each other in terms of the design language, that perhaps the Mac was heading towards a flatter design closer to what's on the iPad or the iPhone. But in reality, what they did is they merged the two in a way that I think is just super interesting, because there's definitely a familiarity there in terms of the shape of the icons to what you see on iOS and iPadOS, but they retained the three-dimensionality of the objects that are depicted in the icons, and actually, kind of took them to another level in terms of kind of the as Flair puts it, the fun and the expression of what's depicted on the icons.
Yeah, I really love this style. I really like it, and I think most of the Big Sur icons are really beautiful. So this combination of like minimalism that meets the return of depth and some shadows and highlights and light sources on top of the icon, I think it's really beautiful. So I'm a big fan, and I would love to see this style find its way to iOS and iPadOS in the future. I mean, this. I don't want to say like every time I talk about like this stuff, got some angry comments from people saying, "Oh, so now you don't like the iOS 7 style anymore." I just feel like we as humans, we like to change things up. You know, every once in a while. It's only natural. It's what fashion teaches us, right? That things are cyclical and things evolve, and it's nice to have something new to look at every once in a while. So why not? Just like perhaps you change your clothes, and perhaps every few years you want to renovate the house, and you're like, you know what? I actually want to move my furniture around. I want it to be different. That's exactly what it is. Humans, they crave novelty in the things they look at, in the things they wear, in the things they use, and I think it's fine. So I'm all for this refreshed design language finding its way to more Apple platforms in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And it's interesting to me where this is leading, because I feel like this is probably the first step in a new era, not just for the Mac, but it'll be interesting to see if this kind of bleeds over into the iOS and iPadOS world. Right now, it's really just a Mac thing, but I could definitely see it spreading further than it is today.
Yeah.
So, Federico, you don't have this in Italy, but Look Around is a feature that Apple's been rolling out on Maps in the United States, and now it's in 11 markets. It was added this week to Seattle. And, I think it was April when it was added to Chicago, and it's a really neat Street View like feature. Street View is Google's version of this that's been around for a very long time, long before Look Around. But I really like what Apple's done with Look Around because they're using pretty high resolution imagery, and when you move through a scene, through a city street with it, it's very smooth and really gives you a sense of place and where you're looking. I think more so than Street View does personally. And it's slowly but surely moving its way from major urban area to major urban area in the United States. And I hope a couple of things, I guess. One is that it starts working, it's trickling down into smaller cities and towns. And with Chicago, that was definitely the case because it's not just Chicago, it's a lot of the suburbs, including like the towns surrounding it where I live. And I hope we see this coming when Maps starts making its way to Europe and other countries around the world. Because at WWDC, Apple announced that the next 3 countries that will get the new Maps are Ireland, the UK, and Canada. And I believe that those markets are going to be rolled out all at once, unlike the United States, which went kind of region by region within America. And that'll be interesting to see when those go live. And I think Apple seems to be also working on another feature, which is not just dealing with, looking around city streets, but accessing areas where that can only be accessed on foot, things like parks and monuments and other landmarks. Because I don't know if you've ever seen some of the pictures of these people who are mapping. It's not just being done by cars. There are some people walking city streets with backpacks on that are doing the photographing. And I suspect that's probably where that's heading. It's hopefully I expect we'll see Italy before too long.
I wonder if the Apple Maps cars were allowed to drive around during the lockdown, because that would have been
that's a good question.
Considering all the safety measures, that would have been the perfect opportunity to take pictures of empty streets and avoid all kinds of issues with like traffic or like trucks in front of the camera and obstructing the view. I remember, we had to go to the doctor during, in March. So when the lockdown was really in effect here. And it was so eerie to drive around Rome and see Rome completely empty, basically. You could only go out for, like doctor's appointments and that kind of stuff, or to go to the supermarket. That would have been like, actually a good opportunity if you need to take a bunch of photographs of like, especially cities like Rome. I wonder if they were allowed to drive around. I would say probably not. I would say that all those activities, they probably stopped during the lockdown.
Yeah, probably. And it probably would have been a fairly complex thing to get the right permissions because different countries and different cities had different regulations about who could be out and for what reasons.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell us about this last story that we covered this week about the New York Times and Apple News?
Well, yeah, so the news is that Apple News has lost the New York Times. It's not like the New York Times was fully on Apple News before. I believe they only had like a subset of their stories available for Apple News users. They were also not the Times was not part of the Apple News, what's it called, Plus? Apple News Plus sort of magazine bundle subscription deal. They were not part of that. But essentially what the Times had said is that they want to realign their interests and make sure that because the Times is one of the success stories of major publishers pivoting to subscriptions and selling subscriptions to people. They're basically saying we want to stop being on Apple News because Apple News does not allow us to have a direct relationship with our readers, whereas we're finding success selling our own subscriptions directly to people via our own website. Which is not a surprise if you listen to AppStories. And if you know me, you know what I think about owning the relationship with your readers and fully controlling the platform that you have and fully controlling your future. I've always thought that if you're a publisher, and this, just personally speaking, this is my opinion. This goes way beyond Apple News. It's about all kinds of aggregators, whether it's Facebook or Google News, whatever. I've always been in favor of doing your own custom thing, doing your own subscription or platform that you fully control without having this middleman, taking a cut or otherwise not allowing you to have a direct relationship with your readers. And so this does not surprise me. I think I have a feeling we're going to see more of these announcements, especially now that with the pandemic, all kinds of different markets are suffering because of there's going to be a recession. There's going to be all kinds of consequences to the economy in all regions, not just in the United States, not just in Italy, everywhere. And so I think more and more publishers will say, well, maybe, you know what? Maybe we do need to own the relationship with our readers. Maybe we need to push these subscriptions more heavily. Why would we want to cede control or a cut of our subscriptions to a service that does not really bring in that many customers? So I think the Times is only the first one this is my personal opinion, my personal theory. This is the first one in a series of announcements along these lines that we're going to see over the next 12 months. I have a feeling we will hear of more publishers say, well, maybe we want to move away from Apple News for now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. I think one thing that is just kind of took people aback a little bit when this news broke is that there's a very long history between Apple and the New York Times, going way back to the original iOS devices. Steve Jobs using the New York Times website as a demonstration of just how great Safari was on the iPhone and the iPad. So, but that was a little, and I guess New York Times also demoing their iOS app on the iPhone way back in the day. But at the same time, that's a very different path for the New York Times, because those are customers that have a direct relationship with them, whether it's through their website or their app. So that is a difference. And I do think it's a pretty big loss, because even though the New York Times only offered a subset of their articles, they were generally, in my experience, the headline stories, the big news of the day. And it may have only been like 5 or 6 or 7 stories, but they were the ones that people were probably most likely to read if they went to the website too. All right, Federico, before we get to our Unwind topics for today, I want to just mention briefly that on AppStories this week, we covered the updated system apps in iOS 14 and iPadOS 14. So we went through all kinds of different apps, messages and notes and reminders and home and on and on. So if you're curious about what some of the changes are in those apps in beta 1, definitely check that out. And then the club, if you're not a club member, check out club.macstories.net. We do an awful lot there every week with our newsletter. And this week, I did a collection of small details from Big Sur that people might have missed with all the news coming out last week with WWDC. So I've got a collection rounding up some of those things. And then Ryan did an extension column which focuses on iOS gaming, which I think is kind of surprising. A lot of attention this year. They're smaller, more detailed things, but Game Center is getting an update and controller support is expanding as well. And I think that those are both things that are going to make a big difference in iOS and Mac gaming going forward. And he's got some thoughts on that. You had an OmniFocus shortcut too, right?
Yes, I put together a quick shortcut to give a demonstration of how it is now possible to run shortcuts in iPadOS 14 from search, so the new universal search, how it is possible to have shortcuts that involve interactions, so things like choosing from lists or entering text in a text field from the home screen. So without having to open the Shortcuts app at all, how you can have something that is similar to the quick entry panel for OmniFocus on the Mac, but on iPad, thanks to iPadOS 14 and Shortcuts. So the new compact UI that Shortcuts offers in iPadOS 14, as well as interactions everywhere, how you can replicate the quick entry with just a series of Shortcuts actions. It's really useful. I think it's becoming my favorite way of entering tasks in OmniFocus, which, by the way, John, quick parenthesis here, I am really struggling once again. This is something that Ryan wrote about in the monthly log. This idea of summer app transitions because of the fact that I need to work on my review. Obviously, I need to check out reminders, and reminders has a really useful widget now. But also, I really like OmniFocus, but OmniFocus does not have a widget yet because the Omni group just started working on the new iOS 14 stuff. And so I'm like, I put the reminders widget on my home screen now, and I'm like, that's really nice. I really like it. Maybe I should switch back to reminders. But then I look at OmniFocus and I'm like, man, I also really like those custom perspectives that I created for myself.
You put a lot of work into it, yeah.
I put a lot of work into them. So I do think, Reminders has a bunch of really nice updates in iOS 14, but it doesn't really let me, create my own filters and perspectives and custom views. So basically what I'm saying is I really hope the Omni group can come through with an iOS 14 update as quickly as possible in the test flight. I really want all my favorite apps to offer widgets now. And also, this is a sub parenthesis, I guess.
Okay.
My home screen is a mess right now. Everything is a mess. Like I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to use the app library? Do I want to go all in with widgets? Do I want to keep some icons? I have no idea. Everything is a mess. I don't know what to do.
This sounds like a whole episode of AppStories that we should do later this summer, because I'm feeling some of the same tensions between the app library, widgets, and the home screen and all that. It's really it's shaken up the way I approach my iPhone in particular. All right, Federico, I guess I should mention, too, that we did a straw poll in the newsletter. And if any club members are listening, please participate in the poll, because we've asked a lot of questions about what people are excited about from WWDC and kind of where they see things heading over the summer into the fall. And there's always a lot of interesting insights that these polls tend to give us, and we'll publish the results in the subsequent MacStories Weekly newsletter. All right, Federico, I also want to thank our sponsor for today's episode and for sponsoring MacStories as well, and that is Streaks Workout. Streaks Workout is an app that will help you get in shape even when you're stuck at home. It creates randomized workouts that you can do at home with no equipment at all, or you can also create your own custom workouts and custom exercises. If you're an Apple Music subscriber, Streaks Workouts also automatically plays upbeat workout tunes for you on your iPhone and iPad workouts. You can also work out with your Apple Watch or using your Apple TV, and there's absolutely no subscription fee for doing that or using any of these apps. The coolest part, though, is that when you start out a workout on your TV, iPad, or iPhone, the app will automatically start a heart tracker on your Apple Watch. So you don't have to worry about that. It does automatically tracks it and gives you the results. Don't let getting stuck at home during the pandemic keep you from working out. Learn more and download Streaks Workout today at streaksworkout.app. Again, that URL is streaksworkout.app. Thanks to Streaks Workout for supporting MacStories and Unwind this week. All right, Federico, let's move on to our Unwind picks. What do you have for us this week?
Okay, so what I have is a TV show, the second season of a TV show. So my pick is The Politician Season 2 on Netflix. So if you're not familiar with The Politician, it is I would say comedy drama, maybe as the genre. The first season was all about this young and privileged kid named Peyton Hobart, and whose goal is his entire life. He comes from a rich family, has a lot of money, goes to a private school. His life goal has always been to eventually become president of the United States. He's worked his entire life to build this image of a young politician, a young person who cares about politics, who wants to become president eventually in the future. So living this perfect life with a perfect girlfriend and the perfect friendships. And in the first season is set in high school, at least the good portion of, except, well, I don't want to spoil it, but it's primarily set in high school, and Peyton wants to become president of his own high school, of his own student body. And so there's the entire plot of the first season is the ongoing elections at these high schools in California, I believe. So all the plots and the twists and turns of this campaign. And the first season of The Politician was really good because of all the scheming, all the intrigue, and all these crazy plans that these kids put in motion for a high school election. Like, it's so funny that they make such a big deal out of a high school thing, and because because Peyton is so set on becoming president of the United States. And he's firmly convinced that all presidents were, all U.S. presidents were also presidents in high school. And so it's like, this is part of my plan, step by step. Season 2, again, I don't want to spoil the ending, but few years later, Peyton decides to run for state senate in New York, for a seat in the New York State Senate. And is going against an old school politician she held that seat in the New York State Senate for like 30 years. So there's like the incumbent against the newcomer. And again, it's all about, this new campaign in season 2. And there's even more scheming. There's even more plot twists. There's even more, things going on behind the scenes, like these major reveals. But what I really liked about season 2 is the pace of it. So it's not that many episodes. I think it's like 7 or 8 episodes. And what I also liked was the secondary plot lines. So Peyton's mother, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, she plays this like progressive sort of liberal politician that's like a completely different, like a different spin on Donald Trump, basically, like completely different policies, but like this sort of this TV personality that decides to run to become governor of California. And it's very fun. It's if you like, so basically I would say if you like TV shows about politics, and especially about like scheming and people double and triple crossing each other, I cannot recommend this enough. It's perfect to binge. We binged this in like 2 days. So it's very, very good.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. I'm going to have to check that out.
It's very fun. It's very fun.
For all I know, Jennifer watched this 3 weeks ago, right before you did, and hasn't told me. But that's kind of an inside joke. All right, I want to recommend a book by Stephen King, and this is not a horror book. It's called On Writing, and this book is not new at all. This book has been around now for I think about 20 years. Something like that. But right after he got hit by a van as he was walking down the highway in Maine and recovered against kind of all odds, really, that was like 20 years ago, he finished off this book that he had started a while before that about writing. And it's an interesting book because unlike a lot of Stephen King books, it's very short, relatively speaking. I mean, I think in a paper edition, it's maybe less than 200 pages long. And it's kind of a combination of autobiography, but also writing manual and advice for writers. And as somebody who writes, I found it really interesting. But I actually read this first long before I was writing at MacStories. I mean, many years before. And I found it to have just great advice for day-to-day writing. There's really practical advice that's kind of nuts and bolts of writing type advice. But then there's also more almost like productivity type advice about the best way to write is to write more and to have a consistent environment and lots of little tips and tricks to try to help you get your writing done without being kind of over the top in kind of the self-help way. Because I don't know about you, Federico, but I've kind of had my fill of things that are like the magic wand that's going to make you be particularly good at X, whatever X happens to be, and a lot of times that might be writing. It's more like the collected wisdom of someone who has been a novelist for decades, explaining kind of the things that were pivotal in his life, both from his development as a writer, but also the things that he's found has worked and not worked as someone who is a very commercial and successful writer in the field. So if you have any interest in writing, it's not like it's not a typical Stephen King book. So I don't think that even if you're not a fan of his work, I think you can enjoy this book because it's told in a very conversational style and is full of lots of interesting nuggets that I think are particular to writers, but also, it's kind of life advice, I suppose, to some degree. That is, I think there's something there that just about anybody can get something out of, whether you're a professional writer like Stephen King or not. So highly recommend the book. It's something that I don't read a lot of books a second time, but it is a book that I have revisited from time to time, like maybe every, 5 years or so. I mean, I just picked it up again recently and started reading back through it. And it reminded me just how good it is and how it's the kind of book that I recommend to a lot of people. All right, Federico, that's it for another edition of MacStories Unwind. I want to thank our sponsor again, and that is Streaks Workout. You can find me and Federico writing over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.